All right.
We're on.
I'd like to call the Keizer Budget Committee to order for Tuesday, May 1st, and then we'll get a roll call.
Bruce Anderson,
Here.
Alan Barker,
Here.
Ron Burson,
Here.
Keith Blair,
Here.
Kathy Clark, here, Don Clark,
Here.
Kevin Dial,
Here.
Kim Freeman, here, Roland Herrera,
Here.
Marlene Parsons,
She is excused.
Laura Reed,
Here.
Amy Ryan,
Here.
Nelson Susselman,
Here.
Jonathan Thompson.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, and the first order of business, we need to elect a chair. Are there any nominations?
Mr. Chair, I would like to nominate Councilor Kim Freeman as chair.
I second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that Councilor Freeman chair this year's Budget Committee. Any discussion? Any other nominations?
Everybody step backwards.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. And I will send this down that direction.
Okay, and then we'll do the vice chair. Now we know.
Wow. You and I are friends. We've been on this committee a long time together. So at this time, I'll entertain a motion for a vice chair, and this needs to be a citizen, so one of our citizen represented members on the Budget Committee.
Madam Chair, I would like to nominate Kevin Dial as vice chair.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any other nominations? Okay. Kevin Dial.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We do have the agenda in front of us, but I would like to ask for approval. April was Volunteer Appreciation Month, and this is the first time that the Budget Committee has met. And tonight we have Sarah Head from the Volunteer Coordinating Committee to make a presentation to this group. Sarah, please come forward.
Good evening, Chair Freeman, Budget Committee members, and staff. My name is Sarah Head, and as she mentioned, April was Volunteer Appreciation Month, so I am a day late, but we wanted to be sure that you were included. And I wanted to come here tonight and thank you for the time away from your families that you spend in these meetings, the time that you're reading the budget document when you could be reading something else, and also for serving on the committee that may not be the most glamorous. By serving on this committee, you contribute to overseeing the resources of this city, you help us comply with budget law, and you also really speak to the spirit of Keizer and participate where we really need it. Some years are easier on this committee than others. Those of you who have been through this a few times know, and we certainly appreciate that you step up and fill these seats. So in honor of that, I've brought you a little something this evening. It's $100 grand, but you are worth so much more.
Thank you, Sarah.
Oh, don't forget Alan.
And the committee, or Tracy and Debbie, or whoever came up with the idea, right?
Don't forget Alan.
Did you want some change?
This is hilarious.
We'll put it in the gen fund.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Sarah. So moving right along, item number 4 is the approval of the budget calendar, which is on page 16 of your book, if everyone has their hard book. And then we have it electronically. For those of you filing along electronically, someone's going to have to clue me in on which page that is, because it's not on my agenda, and I am looking at my paper document tonight. So
It should be the same page.
same page? Okay. So we've lined them up this year? Awesome.
excuse me, pardon me. I make a motion to approve our budget calendar for page 16.
For a second,
Second?
discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Now, moving on to item 5, we have the approval of the fiscal year 17-18 Budget Committee minutes, which are information that was handed out tonight, and so it is right under your agenda. And these are from, just correct me if I'm wrong, can we do all of them, May 2nd and 4th together, or do we need to do them separately? Together, okay. So we have minutes in front of you of May 2nd, 2017, and May 4th, 2017.
Madam Chair, I make a motion, I would move to approve the minutes from the Budget Committee meetings, May 2nd and May 4th, 2017.
Second?
Okay. Discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, now we're on to item 6. This is a great time that I enjoy every year, turning it over to our city manager for his budget message.
You enjoy that?
Yes. Because you
That's-
always have something,
It's always surprising to me.
yes, it is.
So, all right, well, thank everybody for being here. The first thing I want to point you toward, even before the budget message, is page 3, which is really my greatest contribution to this entire document, because Tim does such a great job working on it, and we collaboratively work on it. I like to peruse through what other people in the past have said about democracy over the years. And by years, I mean all the way back to the classical political thinkers like Socrates and Aristotle. None of them are in here this year, but they have been in the past. And so I leave those there just for you to peruse at your leisure, that people have been thinking about this form of government of ours for a very, very long time and have had a lot to say about it. And it's quite an honor, I think, for all of us not only to work in it, but to also live in it and be part of it, and you are part of that, especially at the municipal level. The city council gets to make a lot of decisions, but this group also comes together with the city council to allocate our resources. And at a municipal level, allocating our limited resources is really where the policy hits the road, because council can make a decision. If we don't have resources to make that happen, you just simply can't implement it. So I always appreciate this process every year. This is really where people in a community come together and work together to figure out how we're going to do business this next year, and that's fantastic. So with that, I'm going to lead you to one quote, which is the second one from the bottom. A pure democracy is a society consisting of a small number of citizens who assemble and administer the government in person. James Madison. So that's what you are doing here. You are administering government in person to this community. So with that, page 8 is our budget message. It's a fairly short and sweet one this year. Honorable Mayor Clark, City Councilors, Budget Committee members, and citizens of Keizer, I am pleased to present the City of Keizer's annual budget for fiscal year 2018 and 19. Overall, the City of Keizer is in a stable financial position with resources adequate to maintain the existing city services. The city is expecting overall operating revenues to increase 7% over the prior year. Primary revenue increases are from the Parks Service Fee and Police Service Fee. These fees became effective November 2017, so the city will experience the first annualized impact of the fees collected during this next fiscal year. So this will be the first full year we've collected those fees, and we'll be able to figure out finally with some good data, whether they're enough, whether they're too much, and how we can move forward with those. Property taxes are expected to increase 4%, which includes a 3% increase in assessed values and a 1% increase for growth and all of the construction that has taken place this last year. In addition, charges for service are expected to increase as a result of a proposed 4% water rate increase, a proposed 55-cent per ESU stormwater rate increase, and an expected 3% sewer rate increase via the City of Salem, who manages the city's sewer infrastructure, sets rates for the regional system. We collect those rates, but then pass them through to the City of Salem. And these are consistent with what we told you at the long-range financial planning process. They haven't changed at all. The rate increases are needed primarily to sustain service levels and fund necessary capital improvements, which are identified in the various capital master plans for each of these utilities. Fiscal year 2018 and 19 operating budget is expected to increase 9% as compared to fiscal year 2017-18. This increase is primarily attributed to the annualized impact of the additional personnel costs associated with hiring 5 police officers and 2 parks employees during this last year. The city does not anticipate adding any additional employees during this next year. In addition, the increase is due to increases in pension, PERS, and insurance costs. Capital outlay is expected to increase as the city intends to complete the construction of the bridge over Claggett Creek on Dearborn Avenue. And in addition, the city anticipates replacing or repairing existing park structures, as many as we can do in a year. So I thank the City Council and Budget Committee for providing helpful policy direction and creating this balanced budget. The important questions you asked, the request for detail needed to understand and appreciate the city services. Respectfully submitted, us. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Chris before we start? None. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So at this time, we do open it to public testimony. Your time is limited to 5 minutes per person, and between Kevin Dial and myself, we may figure out how to use the timer that's over here. So just bear with us. I have one person signed up for public testimony at this time, and I believe Mayor Clark wants the opportunity to introduce Allie Treichel. Thank you.
Very official.
Also televised.
Oh goodness.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the, okay, is that loud enough? Okay. Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the Budget Committee. My name is Kathy Clark. I'm the mayor. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce you to Allie Treichel, who is the program manager for the Mid-Willamette Homeless Initiative. I talked to you about this last year and gave a presentation about the work that had been completed by the task force that convened and put together a strategic plan regarding issues serving people who are homeless and housing insecure. We had determined that it was important to have a full-time staff person who understands homelessness, who understands housing and services, and also is able to convene people and help us map out a future and programs for effectively serving people in our community. We went through a recruitment and interview process at the Council of Governments, and we budgeted at the City of Keizer $5,000 toward funding this position. The City of Salem budgets $45,000, Marion County budgets $45,000, and the cities of Monmouth and Independence both joined on with this project after I spoke to you last year. They also are contributing toward funding this position. What I wanted to do tonight was have you meet the person that we hired and hear a little bit about the work she's already been able to get done in the short time that she has been an employee at the Council of Governments. I am very optimistic about the work that Allie is doing, about the relationship she is building, and most importantly, about how we're going to be able to move forward in a very purposeful way in effectively serving people in our community who are moving out of homelessness and into long-term, secure, and safe places to be sheltered and to live. Allie Treichel.
Thank you. Like Mayor Clark introduced me, my name is Allie Treichel. I'm the Homeless Initiative Program Coordinator out of the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments. And funding for my position is included in the proposed budget. And I just wanted to give a brief overview of some updates and some of the work that's been done through the initiative and through my position. I began my position on January 29th, 2018, and my role is to help move the strategic plan forward and to coordinate regional efforts and planning. The strategic plan addresses concerns with affordable housing development, transitional housing, public safety, preventative measures such as financial literacy, and efforts focused on special populations including runaway and homeless youth, veterans, and the chronically homeless. It includes specific steps and actions identified through the Mid-Willamette Homeless Initiative, which I am responsible to help coordinate. And since its adoption in February 2017, we've made significant progress on the strategic plan steps. A few highlights include Mountain West Investments' 180-unit affordable housing development, which is expected to reach full occupancy by February 2019. The expanded use of a common assessment tool among service providers, which will increase service coordination. The implementation of the law enforcement assisted diversion program, and the planning of a transitional housing project for domestic violence survivors. Additionally, work has begun to build a cohesive continuum of care services for homeless youth, including the development of a new youth shelter. Polk County is currently developing 12 supportive housing units for veterans. Arches, a major service provider, is expanding their facility to include a sobering center in partnership with Salem. And WestCare has developed 15 new transitional housing units for veterans, which are now in the plans to expand to full occupancy of 30. Research regarding affordable housing development and best practice has begun. Exploration of a layered approach jobs program is underway, along with best practice efforts to address panhandling. And there are plans to develop permanent supportive housing through a partnership with Salem Housing Authority and Salem Health. There has also been development of a comprehensive resource network through Marion County, and work to expand and develop partnerships around financial literacy programs has also begun. One of the most exciting parts about this position is exploring the co-benefits that this work can bring to the region with an eye towards long-term and lasting effects. As discussed with my steering committee, I am currently researching the viability of using the initiative's strategic plan as a community plan, which is required for certain federal funding resources. This effort could work to include other entities and jurisdictions that were not originally a part of the initiative, providing a structure for planning and a platform for increased partnerships, as well as helping to attract more dollars and leverage funds into our region. This work is an investment, and the issue of homelessness is complex, and working with individuals who are unique and who have their own story is not quick or easy work, and neither are the solutions. And while the work is hard, we know that there are answers. There are communities that have effectively addressed homelessness, and we can learn from their efforts. This strategic plan and the work that has come from it takes into account these lessons and best practice, working towards systems change and towards a long-term investment in our community. I'm excited to be a part of this work, and I'm looking forward to seeing this plan through.
Perfect, thank you. Do we have questions for Ally? Okay, I have one. If
Yes.
No one's going to ask. So I know in your presentation you mentioned some partners that you're working with, but do you have more than what you've listed? So just for a disclaimer, I work for Oregon Housing and Community Services. So I know there's lots of state money that we've been awarded from the legislature for
Yes.
homelessness, supportive housing, multifamily development. Some of our funds went to fund the Mountain West
Yes.
property out on Portland Road. And so I think that as the state, which I'm not here in that role, but I know that they are looking to increase partnerships as well.
Yes.
I'm happy to put you in contact with anyone in my office that potentially could help you, but I think the key to making this work is putting all the resources together and really
Yes.
looking at community partners through our community action agencies. We have neighborhood economic development and just lots of partners to try and end homelessness along with vets, and there's many, many other partners to look at runaway youth and things like that. And so I just want to commend you for the great work in such a short period of time and look forward to another report. I hope you come back before next budget season so we can have more continued update. So thank you.
Yeah.
If I may close, Madam Chair. When Ally interviewed, and I was on the interview panel for her position, it became clear that she had two very important characteristics. One was a educational and professional credentials to be able to understand this work, both from the data and best practices metrics, but also the passion and enthusiasm to follow this through in building relationships across agencies, governments, nonprofit groups, and with the people who really want to make a difference. What we're seeing already is this networking has already brought some incredible opportunities and better understanding throughout our community about how it is that we can work together to help people move out of homelessness and into housing. At a recent Strategic Economic Development Corporation luncheon, the topic was housing and homelessness. And Chad Freeman, the president, was wondering when they decided to do that topic if this was going to be something of interest to business. Ladies and gentlemen, the place was packed. Is it of interest to business? Absolutely. Businesses get it, our community gets it, and pulling together, everybody is going to be able to get it and do some really incredible work for people in our community. I'm very excited, and I thank you for your support in bringing this position and bringing Ally to our community to help us out.
Thank you. No further, no questions? Okay, thank you. I know we have additional people in the audience, so whom would like to go next for public testimony? If you can come up and please introduce yourself. City of residence, and just so you're aware, if you're a new comer to testimony, not Lori Christopher, but the light will come on that's green, which starts your 5 minutes. It will beep at you, and the light will turn yellow when you have 1 minute left, just so it doesn't startle you. So sorry for not making that
Are we 5
announcement.
minutes or 10 minutes?
Are you two separate organizations?
Yes.
Okay, well, I didn't know that. Okay, so
My name is Lori Christopher, and I'm representing Keizer Art Association, and this is,
Chris Eric, Keizer, Oregon, and I'm representing the Keizer Heritage Foundation.
but together, we were supposed to have a cadre of folks here to talk to you about the new, and I've forgotten our name.
Keizer Cultural Center.
No, it's
Keizer
longer.
Heritage and Cultural Center.
The what?
Keizer Heritage and Cultural Center.
There you go. So we use shorthand and call it the Keizer Cultural Center, so that's why I say I don't know our official name. So it's a DBA. So housed within the old school now, and some of you may remember that we saved that old school, and some of you don't. I remember it intimately because I was part of the fundraising for doing that. And it's always meant a lot to us, and we always had a vision, and it was that dang Richard Walsh, who was such a visionary. He is the city councilor that envisioned the Keizer Rapids Park, and we laughed him out of the town practically, and now we have the Keizer Rapids Park. And he was the city councilor that envisioned the boat ramp, and we laughed him out of the city council, and now we have a boat ramp. And he was the city councilor who envisioned a giant playground, and we laughed him off city council, and now we have a giant playground. His vision was to have a cultural center in the old Keizer School where we would bring together theater, arts, museum, and library. So here we are again, implementing one of Richard's ideas, which is facilitated by our mayor, Kathy Clark. It was her forethought to now's the time to find a permanent home for our community theater, and so Keizer Community Theater moved into what is the event room. We just went to the dress rehearsal as a thank you for our volunteers, and it's working beautifully, and they'll stay put, and that's going to be enriching to our community as far as local and regional performances. And they're part of the Salem Keizer, thank you, Salem Theater Network. So this is going to be really something for our community. In the past, you have funded the Keizer Library at the tune, last year was $97.92. That's what you funded it at. We, this year, are asking for a budget of $20,000 to sustain the Keizer Heritage Center as a cultural center. Keizer Art Association, through our monthly art shows, has an income. And Keizer Homegrown Theater, through their productions, have an income. The library and the museum do not have an income. They shared the income that you provided, and also that was provided through the rental of the event room, which has become the theater.
Well, and if I may,
Sure.
like we did try and keep up with the event room and everything else. Just with today's costs, we don't get the volunteers that we used to be able to get. So you end up having to pay people normal wages, which is justified, but now we just can't do it with a volunteer system. So that's why we kind of had to veer another direction to continue something, and the homegrown theater would make sense there.
And I think we were in fear of losing Keizer Homegrown Theater to Keizer because we couldn't, they were wandering in the wilderness and they needed a permanent home. So That's our request. It's really pretty straightforward. It's an additional cost to the city of $10,000. And in what you get for that $10,000 is sustaining the old Keizer Heritage Building. And in addition to that, you've got your entire cultural center all wrapped up in there. And it's all run by volunteers. We have no paid staff. None of the organizations contained within there. There are 4 of them. Thank you. None of them have paid staff. Questions, anyone?
Mayor Clark?
Thank you. In this act, or in this ask, as you mentioned, the Keizer Art Association and the Keizer Homegrown Theater have incomes. So this isn't covering all the costs, is it? It's a match.
It is. We can cover 50% of the cost. There are 2 of us that have a source of income. And the library's not without income, it's just little teeny income because it literally is from book finds. And so it's
And
really...
the book sales.
And book sales. I mean, together, I don't know, $1,000. Anyway, it's very small. And so that is the only income they have. The museum, of course, has no income whatsoever. And that museum is a rich source of history for all of the Keizer history that we have and all of the Keizer families that settled in this area. So it may not be a premier, MoMA museum, but it's our museum and it's our history. And we hope that we can start to work to make it even better than it already is if we don't have to worry about, is it going to be there? Is it going to go away? Is it sustainable?
And the other thing is, we do have a whole bunch of money in a sinking fund to take care of the building, and we're looking at maintenance agreements for that so that we don't have sudden impact causes. So we are evaluating long-term options as well to make sure that the building is successful.
Thank you. In addition to that, there's $67,000 in the sinking fund. That's roofs, that's painting, that's any of the capital expenses that could occur that are not anticipated, replacement of furnaces, there are 4. In addition to that, we're going to, the Keizer Heritage Foundation is seeking a $100,000 line of credit, and we're doing that for a catastrophic event, actually.
Mr. Burson?
So, I guess maybe you can explain the $40,000. What's that used for then?
The
You
$40,000,
have $67,000. You get 20. What's the 40 per year used for?
so $40,000 a year is insurance, it's heating, it's cooling, it's janitorial, it's,
The 40,000 is all of the operations of the center. What keeps, it's
the
the
total
operating
cost to
expenses.
operate the building, Ron.
Yeah,
$40,000 a year?
Yeah.
a little bit under that. It was about 38 in the last year when we did their numbers. But it's to operate the building, it's all of the utilities, it's all of the day-to-day operations.
I just, I guess I'd like to see that when we get to that on the agenda, that readout.
Mayor Clark, do you have a breakdown of that? We were supposed to have, former Mayor Dennis Coho was supposed to be here tonight, and he is not here, and neither is Lyndon, so I don't know that, if you need it tonight, I don't know that we have that available to you, but we would have it. When's your next meeting, Thursday?
I have it in the email. I can probably bring
Get
it
it
up
to there?
during the break.
Great.
Yeah, we meet again on Thursday.
Councilor Ryan?
Councilor Ryan? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was under the understanding that Keizer Heritage Foundation, or I'm sorry, that, let me get my foundations correct, that the theater company, Homegrown Theater, actually rented that space and paid to use the space, correct? So is that showing the revenue then that we're not seeing yet, but it's, so,
Part of the other $20,000. So it's 40,000 operating costs, 20,000 from Keizer Arts and Keizer Homegrown Theater.
Keizer Arts meaning?
Keizer Art Association pays $8,000, and Keizer Homegrown Theater pays $8,000. The other $24,000, there's $4,000 that comes from other means, and then $20,000 is from the city, of which you're already paying almost 10, 97, 92 of that.
Not to be confused with the Keizer Art Association.
It is the Keizer Art Association.
Our committee, that city committee,
That's Keizer Keizer Public Art Committee.
that's
KPAC.
separate. That's separate.
It is.
Thank you. I just want to clarify that. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Mayor Clark?
So I think both Chris and Lori can probably talk to the process we went through to go from running an event center and making this a full cultural center. The long-term future of this building relies on being able to keep it active, keep people in there, using it, as well as appropriately maintaining it, which is the duty of the Keizer Heritage Foundation. And the reason I'm speaking up, for anybody who's wondering why I'm stepping into this, is because I represent the city on the Heritage Foundation board. That's one of the roles that I play in this, because the land that the building is on belongs to the city. So this is a collaboration. And we looked at the profit loss on running that as an event center, and it wasn't making it. When we didn't have all of the labor donated and all of the advertising donated and actually had to pay something for it, it was yielding very little in terms of money to run the building. So that's when we looked at alternatives, and this is a workable, affordable solution to make sure that that building remains a cultural center, and all of the arts, spoken, written, historical, and visual arts have a place to all be together. It also makes it a very strong candidate for grants when you have a cultural center of this nature.
And
If you wanna
we
add
have
to
not eliminated the potential for writing grants in the future, and especially for capital projects. We can certainly try to do that. In addition to that, we can solicit in-kind donations. We've already done that for painting, because the building is going to have to be painted either this year or next year. That's a huge expense. That's a big building, and it's about a $25,000 expense to paint that building, and it's time to do that. So all of those things, I mean, it's an old building. It's a remodeled building, but it's an old building, and so there's a lot of maintenance that goes into that. And really the question you have to ask yourself as a budget committee is a cultural center in the city of Keizer something we value as taxpayers? Because we're asking for $20,000 worth of taxpayer money. We understand that. It's an addition of about $10,000 of what you're already paying. You're already using taxpayer money to shore up the community library, which is a recreational or a reading library. It's not a resource library. We don't have professional librarians. We don't have a resource center. We have none of those things. It is a community library, predominantly children's literature and enjoyable reading and bestsellers. So that's the question before you is $20,000 investment or an additional $10,000 investment to what you're already paying, is that something you value as taxpayers and as a budget committee?
And on top of that, we do have multiple events throughout the year that are open to the public and advertised. I know I brought my kids down for the Halloween party and they loved it. We cut pumpkins. There's lots of free events that we offer to the community as well.
To open up the historic building.
If I can just throw
City
my
manager.
$20,000 into this real quick, my 2 cents.
Oh, you're paying for it? Great.
Oh, I'm not, actually. But I just wanted to explain my support of this, and it's probably different than whatever, what others would want it to be. I would want to support this because I find that it provides, sort of an esoteric value to the community, and that's true, and I do find value in that. But I support this budgetarily because I am certain that if we don't support it, the operations will not be able to continue, and those groups will fail, and we will inherit the building as the city, at which point we will have a decision, either tear the building down or let it go into disrepair or do something with it. And under any scenario, the doing something with it side is going to cost more than the $20,000 we're getting, that they're asking for. So
Which is really 10, because you're already paying 10.
It's 20 total each year. So my support for this is because all of the other realistic options cost us more money than that. So that's.
And we really did go through that evaluation when we were trying to figure out, the event room was exceedingly labor intensive and quite a bit of more destruction than you would think to a historic building, and so it was constant repair of the damage that had been done. And when we weren't breaking even, it was in the red, and so the rents continue to go up higher and higher and higher. And there's just a limited capacity for all volunteer organizations to be able to earn enough money to be able to pay those rents. And that was one of the factors, as well as a prior city councilor, a prior city council initiated the contract with the Keizer Heritage Foundation. We felt strongly that that was the only historic building that we have in Keizer, and we wanted to maintain that, and we wanted to preserve that for posterity. We wanted to have a museum, we wanted to have an art association, we wanted to have a community library. And so the way that that was happening was through that event center, but the events were not sustaining. It wasn't making enough money. And so Chris is absolutely right. All the other alternatives, it's a matter of if you rent it out to independent businesses, even that did not break even at what you were able to rent it for. And then the public would have no access to that historic building. It would just become another business.
Councilor Ryan?
Thank you. Just a follow-up question. For clarity, does this mean that the library doesn't have a line item now and this is in place of that?
Yes.
Okay, so we don't have, so part of our budget that went to the library where we increased it last year, for example, this would cover that and that is removed, correct?
Correct, Councilor
Okay,
Ryan.
thank you so much.
Mr. Barker?
Yeah, what is the activity that takes place right now that creates the most income for the property?
Probably Keizer Art.
It would be equal between Keizer Art Association and Keizer Homegrown Theater.
It's projected to be. They're brand new.
projected.
They're brand new into the building, so we don't know. It could end up being Keizer Keizer Homegrown Theater. We don't know yet.
And how many events do we know that is booked for that building this year?
Booked.
How many events will they be using, or how many times will they be using it this year? Are they paying us by the month for the building?
Yes.
Okay,
The Homegrown Theater, sir?
yeah.
Yes. And they've got, I know there's 4 plays planned, and each of those plays have an 8-day run. And then the Keizer Art Association uses that building on a daily basis. We pay a monthly rent of $800. And predominantly, the art classes are for seniors and children. And so there's a membership in the Keizer Art Association of about 120, 130 people. And the classes are anywhere from 15 to 30 people each class, and they're filled to capacity. So that goes every day.
And the other thing to that is we're looking at this as a partnership. So if Keizer Homegrown Theater is going to do a play on a certain topic, we're going to get the library involved on, hey, let's take those books and advertise those. And Keizer Art Association to, hey, here's this stuff. And then here's before the theater show, but on breaks you do these. Check out the museum. So we're trying to look at this as a larger picture of a partnership.
Thank you.
Over 100 volunteers currently work at the Keizer Heritage Center in the 4 organizations to make it go.
Mr. Thompson?
How big is the building? Like how many square feet, just ballpark?
I
do you
want to
guys
say
know?
25,000.
Well, the reason I ask, I was just doing some
Is that
back of
right?
the,
Is about right. I think that's about right, Jonathan.
I was doing just some back of the envelope math, and it comes out to about $3,200 a month to
Yeah.
run that place. And for 25,000 square feet, I know what I pay to run my much smaller office than that. That's much newer. And just utilities alone seem like they're gonna eat up a pretty big chunk of that $3,200 a month.
And we keep it hotter and we keep it colder.
Right.
And then the lift itself, whenever that lift goes out, that costs
yeah.
a lot of money. And that's ADA accessibility. So.
Right. Well, and it gives a home for those organizations, which, you're probably not going to remodel that to make it a physician's office, even if it was just cost prohibitive. So, it's going to happen.
Yeah, and I don't know which one of you said it, but the reality is, if, we're using economies of scale to put all 4 of these volunteer organizations under one roof, that's what makes it viable. Those independent organizations can't stand. So by putting it all together, that is truly the Keizer way to utilize economies of scale in an existing building that's already been remodeled with volunteer labor. That's right down our Keizer alley.
Makes sense to me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Do we have any other questions? So I have one, and I'm not sure if Lori or Chris, you can answer it, or our city manager. But in the future, I know you're asking for 20, but let's be clear, you're really asking for 10 because in years past we have supported the library, but again, we have voted on that. It's not a given, so I just want to make sure we're clear on that. But what about, I know you have your sinking fund, but with this arrangement, I'm assuming, but I'm gonna ask a question, are we putting money in that sinking fund? Is it up to the cultural center to put money in the sinking fund for, I know you're looking at painting, but what other repairs may be needed, and then whom pays for those repairs? I guess where I'm looking at, what additional costs are the city gonna be incurring to keep the building open, and if that's something we add to our long-range plan in the future? I just think potentially it could be more than what we're asking for today, and if that's how it happens, I think we're okay, but I think, I guess I would like to put that on the table at some point if we need to have those discussions down the road.
Yeah, one of my expectations, and I know the council has assumed this in the past, is that for this give, these groups would manage that building. That includes future maintenance and continually building that sinking fund to cover those costs. So hopefully that is our contribution to this project.
That's what's anticipated. I'll come right to you. That's what's anticipated. I mean, there could be a catastrophe and all 4 furnaces go out at the same time. That's why we're going to try to establish a line of credit, so in case that happens. But there's $67,000 in there. We all have membership bases, and so we may do fundraising through those membership bases for the same to build the sinking fund. There is a small percentage, but I can't remember how much it was. Kathy, do you know, Chris?
So the bigger picture of that, is we found multiple maintenance agreement websites where we can pay a monthly rate and they will cover the furnaces, they have this coverage. So we have a guaranteed rate every month that we are paying, and they cover those things. So we are currently working on getting that maintenance agreement set up. We just pay this flat fee and they cover these things.
We're looking into it and researching.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bersons?
So I guess I was waiting for the answer to the question. On the $20,000, or in previous years, the $10,000, was some of that money put into the sinking fund?
Not when it was 10,000, no, sir. That money went just to the library. That paid the library's rent.
So the $67,000 in the sinking fund, where did that money come from?
Various sources. It came from membership from the Keizer Heritage Foundation. There was a couple of grants that they received a while back, and part of the money from the event room was diverted to the sinking fund, a portion of it.
Do you have another question? No. Okay. Sorry, because I thought you were, okay. Any other questions? So we still have one that you asked earlier that we need to get the breakdown, and either the mayor can pull it up or we can have that information for us on Thursday.
Correct.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Thank you. No other further questions? Okay, thank you. Anyone else in the audience? No? No? Okay, perfect. Thank you. My agenda and on my paper. All right, so on to budget presentations and deliberations. Our first fund that we're going to look at is Administrative Services Fund. City Manager, page 102.
Mr. Wood. Well, before we get too far into the process, we do have a few new faces this year, so I thought I would give a little bit of an overview of the budget process that we have and what we're here to do. Oregon has some very strict laws regarding the municipal budget process. The laws are really to promote transparency through a lot of the notice requirements. We have to publicize the budget. We have to put it on our website. We do notices in the Keizer Times. All that's really to try to generate public involvement. In addition, having citizen members of the budget committee is another way that we ensure that we have public involvement. So it's supposed to be a really involved process throughout the entire community. While our budget is presented in total in certain areas, each fund is a standalone entity. So as you think about it, the city really has 20 plus different businesses that we're running. So we can't take money from one fund necessarily and move it to another. That would be breaking budget law, and that has some pretty serious ramifications. There is some civil liability if we overexpend, or if we spend money on things that it's not supposed to be spent on, such as taking, water fund revenues and paying for police officers, or taking street fund money and paying for parks. Those things would really, in my opinion, for me, be a career-limiting move. And I'd probably end up wearing orange jumpsuits, so that would be bad. Really, with the municipal budgeting, the emphasis is really different than your personal budget. So with your personal budget, you're looking at, can I meet my current needs? Can I also meet my wants? Also plan for retirement? We really don't have that. We have an emphasis on the ability to provide services into the future. That's really where our emphasis is. That's also different than, say, a regular corporation. A corporation is really focused on the bottom line. What's the profitability? When you start thinking about it, do you really want your water system to be based on profitability? That could go sideways really quickly as we try to cut corners to have profitability. All of a sudden we have green, brown, purple water flowing through our system. So really for us, it's really the emphasis is on the ability to provide services into the future. As I indicated, there are some ramifications to the budget process. For us as employees of the city, there is civil liability for if we overexpend, so we can be taken to task and have to pay up on a personal basis. There's also ramifications if we overexpend from a city council process. The state of Oregon would require us, if we overexpend in a certain area, to put a written plan into place and come back to the city council, approve this plan, then we'd forward that on to the state. So there's significant penalties for going over budget. So having said that, our budget process here is really focused on each individual line item within a budget and coming up with what we think is going to be a reasonable number for that line item. In any given year, some line items may be over, some line items may be under, but really the emphasis is on the total to ensure that we come in under budget. So yeah, we could nickel and dime and try to whittle everything down, but we really want to take a moderate approach and focus on what's a reasonable expectation for this type of line item. Along with that, in our general fund, which is our most constrained fund, and it's still constrained even with the additional park fees and police fees, which only impact the level of service that we're providing. They don't provide really any relief to our general fund. Within that, our goal is always to provide as much services as possible. So historically, we've budgeted more in expenses than we have in revenues, with the idea that some of those line items, as I indicated before, we're going to be under budget, and we'll be able to work our way to having our revenues equal our expenses or be slightly ahead. We've been able to do that for the last several years fairly successfully, but we do try to provide as much service as we possibly can. As we discuss each fund, historically we've made a motion to approve that fund after we've discussed it, made any amendments that we feel like we need to at that point. Also at the end of the budget process, we have to make another motion to approve all of the budgets altogether. At either point in time, you can make recommendations if you want to make an amendment to the budget. So while we're talking about the street fund, if you say, oh, I want to do this, this, and this, and you get enough support for that, we can make that adjustment while we're talking about the street fund, or we can come back at the very end and bring that one back up if we so choose. I'm also supposed to do a shout out to my kids. They came on Bring Your Kids to Work Day, and they stapled together all of the outside budget request information and collated that. So thank you, kids. Along with that, I did provide you a copy, a summary sheet, and a copy of all the requests. There is one request that's still going to be coming, and I'll get that electronically to you folks either probably tomorrow or the next day. I'll also have a hard copy at the next meeting. With the requests, just about all of them have been funded this year. We had 3 that are new this year, 3 that are outliers. And what we'd really ask is when the time comes and you start to discuss those, if we do decide to include them, we'll just take the money either out of the ending fund balance for that fund or out of contingency, depending on which funds those are. The ones that we'll have some discussion about that aren't included in the budget is $2,000 for the Keizer holiday lights. So those are the lights up and down River Road. We have historically provided money to them in the past, but they have not needed any money for the last several years. Also, Keizer United has requested $2,000. They came last year and we denied their request. That came back again this year, so that one is also not included. Then with respect to the Chamber of Commerce, they've come back, submitted a request for $8,500 in TOT tax. And again, they made a similar request in the past, and we've denied that one, so that one will also be up for consideration. But all the rest of the asks have already been included, and as Chris had indicated earlier, the internal staff supported the additional $10,000 to the Keizer Keizer Heritage Cultural Foundation, for the reasons that Chris recommended, and also for what Lori Christopher brought before us today. So those will be up for debate most likely next Thursday when we get to the general fund and to the community center fund. So with that, moving into the budget document itself, there's a few things that are going to flow through the entire document, and I thought it might be good just to address them at this point rather than bringing them up with each fund. So if you wouldn't mind turning to page 67. During fiscal year 2017-18, the current year that we're in, we added several bodies. The headcount has gone up actually 8 positions. We approved one additional position during the budget process last year, and that was for a municipal utility laborer. We've also added 2 park employees as the result of the implementation of the park service fee, and we've added 5 police officers as the result of the police service fee. So that's going to have a significant impact on those budgets as you look through. The other page, I would say, let's turn to page 71. This is the page summarizing the benefits. With this, throughout the document, you'll see insurance has gone up about 8%. That's somewhat of a blended rate. So you see that pretty consistently throughout the budget. There's going to be several, like the police or the parks, where you're going to see a much larger increase. And the reason for the increase is the additional bodies that have been added. So when we get to those, we can highlight those as well. As we talked about before, retirement, which is primarily PERS, we did see a significant increase this year. It's not a result of the rates increasing at all. Again, that's just adding the additional 8 bodies, the annualized impact of doing that. Like we talked about during the Long Range Planning Committee meeting, the PERS rates are set to increase July 1st, 2019. So our next go-around of budget talks will be talking about that. The rate increase alone is going to be about $250,000 overall to the city. The impact on the general fund alone is going to be about $170,000. So that's going to be a significant impact. That will be about as much as the property taxes will increase for that year. So we have kind of some gloom and doom lying before us. But as I indicated before, Chris indicated during the budget message, we are at a financially stable point. But during this next year, we're really going to be taking a look, seeing how we can address those increased costs that are coming our way. So with that,
Sorry, Tim, while we're on that page, just something that kind of stood out to me was workers' comp and how that went down.
it actually went down. The primary reason is we had some claims during this current year.
Oh.
So there is a likelihood if we continue to have claims into the future, we'll have to come back with a budget request.
Okay.
So that's really why you're seeing it go down. The rates of themselves actually are set to go up, I believe, 5%. But it's a pretty small dollar amount overall.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
The other thing that you'll see consistently throughout the budget document is increase in labor costs. At the end of 2017, we saw the CPIW at about 4.2%. We typically try to peg our cost of living increases to that. We've had some separations throughout the years, like we talked about during the long-range planning. For this year, we've used 3% as an increase. That means for budgets where there's been no change in staffing, you should be able to see a 3% to 6.5% increases. So that'll be kind of the range that'll be pretty normal based off of a 3% increase, and then also any step increases that any employees are eligible for. So that will really be the range that you'll see throughout the document. So with that, also keep in mind that we do budget to the nearest $100. So for some of the smaller dollar items, you may see some huge increases, and that's really just going to be the rounding impact. So if you have something that's $100 and it gets rounded up to 200, you're going to see that 100% increase. But it's really, don't get too alarmed when you see those kind of things necessarily. So let's see, I did forget something. So again, wellness, we talk about this every year. We budget the wellness line item so that every employee can participate. Does everyone participate? No, but we would like to give them the opportunity to, and we don't want to tell someone that you can't go exercise and get your stipend because we're out of budget money. So we do budget the maximum exposure that the city would have if everyone participated. And again, that would be one of the areas where we don't necessarily bank on it, but we know there's going to be some cost savings there that would impact the general fund and help reduce that deficit that we see each year. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chris at this point, and he can talk about the city manager budget.
So what
Chris,
I've asked, yes ma'am.
Can I just stop you for a second?
Yes.
I know I just want to make sure if we have some questions, I want to make sure we get them addressed. Mr. Burson.
So the 3%, are we in the middle of the police union's contract? So
That is
okay,
correct.
So we're at the end of that? Okay.
Mr. Burson, we are in bargaining right now. At this time, the new collective bargaining agreement would become effective July 1st.
Of 18.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No, perfect. Thank you, Chris.
And I might also mention that we're also bargaining the Public Works group as well. So we have two unions bargaining right now. Okay, so what I've asked folks to do is to basically, just like in previous years, highlight any major changes that you might see over last year or the year before, but not necessarily walk through every tiny detail of the budget. Otherwise, we will be here for days upon days upon days. So the only other two things that I would add, somebody told me once about municipal budgeting that we do all of the things that nobody else can make a profit doing. And so I find that to be true. We're a weird collection of businesses all jumbled together. Most of those are not profitable, but they're public service. And then once again, black and red are not our bottom line. It's public interest that we go toward. So, and sometimes providing for the public interest isn't a profitable business. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. My budget will be completely unchanged with the exception of the CPI and increases in insurance costs and whatnot. So I've not added anything different. I'm still choosing not to take any sort of cell phone stipend, haven't increased vehicle allowance, so there you have it. Any questions?
Any questions of the city manager? Okay, hearing none, and we are approving these as we go, correct?
For the Administrative Services Fund, we can do it all at the
At
end.
the end?
At
Okay,
the end of that.
perfect. Thank you for the clarification. Okay, page 104, City Attorney.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, the budget is on page 104 and 105. There's also preliminary material back on page 75 and 76 describing our office. And like Chris's budget, it is unchanged except for any CPI increases. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Hearing none, we'll move on to,
And you're not buying law books this year? No. You're not buying law books this year. You did that last year, right?
Thank you very much, Chris. Yes, we're not buying statutes this year. It's only in odd-numbered years. So.
okay, perfect. Moving on to the City Recorder, page 106. Tracy?
Kind of ditto. There's no changes in this budget either, except for under the personnel services line items. So, if you have any questions? Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, none, perfect. Moving on to Human Resources, page 108. Michelle?
Thank you. This sounds like a broken record, but really no significant changes in this budget either. There are a couple of small increases in the material and services, primarily related to the increased staff and the per-person cost of that with contracts. So that's pretty much it. Oh, and we have to buy some AED batteries for our AED machines.
How often is that?
We have to replace those approximately every 3 years, and pads every, I think, 2 years. That's it.
Questions for Michelle? I don't have a question, but I would like you to just share some things of wellness that happens in the city. I have the pleasure of sitting on the Personnel Policies Committee, so we get to see them, and sometimes we actually get to look at all the items that the staff may have the opportunity to win or sample. And so I just think it's important for this committee, but also for citizens to understand really what wellness is here at the city of Keizer.
What I'd prefer to do, with your permission, is bring a few flyers next Thursday, and so we can show the committee what we actually send out to folks and what the promotions look like. But primarily, we try to do healthy snacks on a fairly regular basis, and we bring educational material along with the snacks, and we run a number of competitions. Our folks are very competitive, and those competitions will have some sort of a token prize at the end. Sometimes a fairly significant prize like a gift certificate, and sometimes just something really cute and small. And primarily, folks are just excited to be participating in the program. As Tim said, we don't spend all of the money stipend-wise, but that's not representative of the participation itself. That really just means, did folks submit information to get that stipend every pay period? And there are a lot of folks who participate that don't bother to do that every pay period, even though it's leaving a little money on the table.
Explain the stipend just a tiny bit.
Stipend, the amount of the stipend, it's fairly nominal. Let me see if I can get the dollar amount for you. Basically, our employees have the opportunity for up to $15 per employee per pay period. And to do that, they have to input activity minutes in their, we use an online program, and they participate by putting in activity minutes saying that they're exercising or doing a number of things related to health. And so they have to input that every pay period just prior to payment. And nobody's required to do that, but I can tell you that our participation level right now, the combination of ORPAT for our officers and our health and wellness program, is 75% of city employees. That's a very high number for a health and wellness program.
And that does what for our insurance rates?
And that, we believe, Chris asks, and that does what for our insurance rates? It gives me one of the only real opportunities that I have to negotiate with our insurance providers to say, here's what we are doing as an employer to keep our rates, or keep our experience low as far as making sure our employees are healthy. And so every year they come to us with rates that are well into the double digits as our proposed rates, and every year so far we've been able to get them to single digit. So this program and the amount of money we put into it not only really helps our employees, I think it helps morale, because folks are happy to participate in these things, and it gives them something fun to do, but it also impacts the bottom line.
Thank you. Any further questions? No? Okay, moving on to finance. Non-departmental, page 110. Tim?
From a personal services standpoint, it is pretty much status quo with the cost increase that we talked about. Although from a materials and services standpoint, we've experienced some growing pains this year. We do have a requirement to do an actuarial review of our post-employment retirement benefits, which we don't offer any. It's a paperwork accounting kind of thing, but we're required to go through the motions. So with that, we're required to get an analysis of the insurance premium rates that people who retire from the city and elect to continue on the city's retirement program, we have to have an actuarial analysis of their rates and how that has been impacted over the life of their career with the city. It's very confusing and complicated, and it's accounting for accounting's sake, to be honest. But now that we've hit 100 employees, we can't kind of just sneak past the requirement. We're going to have to go through the full-on process. So you're going to see that increase in the audit and contractual services line item. The other piece that's going to be increasing there is it's time for us to do a fiduciary review of our 457 plans. And that will entail hiring an outside consultant to review the benefit offerings, the investment offerings, just go through the motions to make sure that we're offering the employees the best packages that we can. We haven't ever done one of those in the history of the city that I'm aware of, so it's about time to look at those and make sure that we're keeping up with our competitors and also doing our fiduciary responsibility. So that's the increase that you're going to see in the audit fees and contractual services. Other than that, it's, like I say, relatively same as the past.
Mr. Thompson?
Who requires this paperwork nightmare it sounds like we have to do?
Well, it's a combination of the Government Accounting Standards Board. Also, our auditors won't give us a clean opinion on our financial statements if we don't do that process.
And our employees they go on the Public Employee Benefit Board or PERS or is some state program they go on after retirement? They remain on again?
The state has written into the statutes that for employees that retire, we have to give them the option of continuing on with the city's health insurance plan.
Okay.
So they're still part of our plan, and they're paying the full premium. But what the accountants have said is there's an implicit rate subsidy that happens over the life of an employee's career here, that really that rate that they're paying at the end, when they're retired, should be significantly higher because they're probably using more benefits, going to the doctors more, that kind of a thing. But since they're paying the same total premium amount that the city pays on behalf of the employees, there's, like I say, it gets complicated. But there's an implicit subsidy that goes to their rates. And the actuaries have to parse that off, and then I'll have about a 4-page addition to our financial statements this year trying to explain all that.
I was just wondering if every little city has to do this. It seemed like maybe there could be a legislative fix through the League of Oregon Cities so every little city didn't have to do this, because it sounds like a complete waste of time.
That would be nice, yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Ryan?
Thank you, Chair. If I understand correctly, I'm looking at line item 10 under the non-departmental, if I'm on the right page here. In administrative support, it jumps 48,000, which is half of the increase in salaries is the way it looks to me. Is that correct? Is that a new person? What are we looking at there?
You're looking at the 2016-17 line, the 110,185. So the jump from there to the new dollar amounts, we were really a body short. That's the transition period from when the previous finance director left. And when I took over, we didn't have a position filled for probably 9 months or so.
So it's a person, it's a body.
Correct.
And then that jump for another 8,000, almost 9,000 is a salary increases?
Correct.
Okay, because I'm looking at a total increase of salaries at 110,000, if I'm correct, total departments, and that's half. So it's because it's a person.
That would be correct, yes.
Thank you so much.
Any other further questions? No? Perfect. Moving on to information technology, page 112. Mr. Wood?
Again, from a personal services standpoint, there's been no changes. We still have 2 IT employees. It gets a little more exciting when we get to the materials and services and capital outlay, but not much. Within the software line item, the primary reason for the increase over the previous year, with a lot of the criminal justice information system requirements that we're facing from the police department, we have to make sure that all of our email is encrypted. A lot of our officers like to take their phones, personal devices out in the field with them. So we're going to be needing to get some software to add to their phones and also a centralized controlling terminal or whatever to be able to control their phones in the event that they lose them. So that's the primary driver for the increase in software, is just to maintain the criminal justice information systems requirements of encryption and data safety. With respect to hardware, we have been in this building almost 10 years. I know it's kind of shocking. I guess we're at year 9 right now, going on 10. So a lot of the things are starting to age. What we're looking at doing is fixing our door system. It's been getting temperamental over the last year, 2 years. We're going to upgrade that system to make it easier to use and more reliable. We're also looking at our camera security systems. We've had a few cameras that we need to replace that are on the fritz, only work part of the time or not at all. So we're going to be fixing those as well. We also have several aging servers. I think I'm embarrassed to say that we have some 2003 servers still in play. So we'll be replacing those this year as well. The computer hardware line is actually going down this year because during this current year that we're in, we had a significant upgrade to our phone system that's in process. So with that out, the offsetting increases of the server, the door system, and the cameras is really offsetting that. So it's going down, but we're still doing some interesting things. Also included in this, there was a question earlier, some of the microphones, we're going to be looking at replacing those as well. And with that, if there's any questions?
Questions? So I did ask Tim about the microphones because you'll see some people share, some work, and some don't. And so I wanted to be sure. I didn't see that specifically called out in the budget, so I'm really happy to hear about that. And so just because normally you don't see a decrease, so do you feel that the decrease in computer hardware is a safe projection for the year, or?
I believe it's a good number. Like I say, we had a really outlier with the telephone system. That was about $47,000 that won't be recurring this year. So,
thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay. Moving on to page 114, the utility billing. Mr. Wood?
So with this one, you're going to see a little bit of strangeness within the personal services. This is really the impact of some turnover that we had within the department. Over the last year and a half, I guess 2 years, we've seen 2 people come and go, and we've also seen 1 person move from this department into the finance non-departmental budget. So that's why you're seeing some of the numbers are a little bit just slightly out of line. It's the impact of the turnover that you're seeing. With respect to postage and printing, what you're really seeing with the increase is the timing of when we have to buy those blue envelopes. So during certain years, we've bought a lot of those blue envelopes at certain times. Just the way that we're running out, you're going to see a big hit in the next year because we're going to have to buy a whole bunch. We typically buy about 100,000 of those at any given time. So you're kind of seeing the timing. I know it's crazy. Blue envelopes. Who would have guessed? With contractual services, that's primarily credit card fees. We're still seeing people use their credit cards more often. They're not using as many checks. The checks are going away. Cash is going away. So you're really seeing just more credit cards. And then also the interest rates on the credit cards are starting to rise now that we see the rise in the interest rates. So that's what you're seeing with the contractual services. With respect to the meetings, travel, and training, we do have really 3 new employees within the department that we're hoping to be able to send off to some training with respect to our Springbrook utility billing software. So that's why you're seeing the increase in I guess the regular travel and training budget. So with that, if there's any questions?
Questions? I ask this every year because it's kind of a thorn in my side with the contractual services. It just keeps going up and up. We have no negotiation room, either with our financial institution, another vendor, other payment options.
We're probably due to evaluate credit card providers The reality is, though, the rates charged by Visa, MasterCard, Discover Card, those are going to be pretty much the same wherever we go. So it's going to be very minor savings, if any, when we move somewhere else.
And then you have the cost of moving too, if there's,
Correct.
okay. Mr. Dial?
So I know when I get my fuel, they charge me a fee for using a debit card. What's the option of that? I know there's some legalities, but, if they insist on costing the city can return the cost to the recipient.
Sure. We've discussed that in the past of whether charging a fee to the end customer or not, and we've always elected not to pass that fee on, even though it does get buried into the rates that everyone pays. So that is a policy discussion that we could definitely have.
There are carrots and sticks.
Really, the advantage of the credit is that we receive payment and don't have to send people to collections. And so we reduce our costs in that area and receive our revenues more regularly and more predictably. So, those are some significant benefits to taking credit card payments. So.
Mr. Thompson?
Mr. Epley got me. So I was just going to ask if it would seem to me it might actually, even with these fees, save us money to not have to hand process a check or, all that kind of stuff that costs money and, deal with bounce checks and all that kind of stuff.
Correct. If you look back in the staffing, we've actually dropped an employee out of the utility billing, and that really is because of the online bill pay and paying with credit cards online. So that we have seen some savings to offset that. So when we look at that specific line item, you really have to factor in a drop in employees as well that we've seen over time.
Any other questions? Thank you. Okay, moving on to Public Works. Non-departmental, page 116. Mr. Lawyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like everybody else has said so far, no real changes in this budget. This particular budget captures costs for public works operations that are spread over multiple funds. Like my wages are carried over 5 or 6 different funds. A few years ago, we created this fund to help tracking of those expenses much simpler. Instead of having to look for 6 places for one particular expense, we only look in one. The change really for this year is the addition of some on the shop improvements line item, $10,000. Basically, that's new chairs for the staff over at the Public Works shop. As Tim mentioned earlier, we've added 3 new full-time bodies to the Public Works staff this current fiscal year. We were able to add some desks over at the shop, put together some very well-used chairs in the interim. And as we were doing this, realized that the rest of the chairs at the shop are quite old, probably pushing 15, 18, 20 years now. And it's a collection of hand-me-downs for the most part. And so we put in here to give everybody over there a new chair this year for another 15 or 20 years. Because they honestly, I'm kind of making light of that, but they don't use them a lot every day, so they do last a long time. But as everything does, things wear out, and it's there to that point. So that's really the only change in this particular fund.
Questions? No? Okay. Moving on then to page 118, Civic Center Facilities.
Thank you. This is the fund that manages and maintains this entire facility. City Hall side, police side, utility payments and everything come out of this fund. Really not any significant changes. We do have some I would say less than, but more than regular maintenance things to do this next year. Like some repairs to the pergolas over the City Hall and Police Department area break room. We discovered some rot happening in one of the glue lamp beams out there. Dan, our facilities guy, noticed that. So we're gonna get that corrected. Kind of shocking, they're only 9 years old, pushing 10 years old, and there's already some rot. So we're gonna make some changes to that, alter the design a little bit to prevent the water from running where it is and causing the rot. That's about, I think that bid was about $9,000. And some other items, a repair to one of the heating systems, heating system number 7. that was not planned, more than just routine maintenance. But other than that, it's pretty much status quo, no significant changes.
Questions? Counselor Ryan?
Thank you. Real quick, the line 16 clothing allowance,
Yes,
can you explain that to me?
we offer a clothing allowance to all our public works employees for jeans, boots, those kinds of things for, their kind of work they do is hard on clothing, so we offer them a clothing allowance once a year. to buy
Okay,
us
I was confused. I thought it was for the Civic Center employee,
It is.
but it's for the utility work, is public works, you guys. It's not the same, right?
Yes, it is the same. The facility maintenance person, Dan,
Right.
gets a clothing allowance, just like the public works field staff get a clothing allowance.
It's
So
all combined.
Yeah. It's not all combined. It's out of each fund. You'll see clothing allowance in the
Okay.
water fund, street fund, stormwater fund, for the employees paid out of that fund.
Gotcha.
This is just the one employee for the facility fund.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just real quick, just to give a sort of a warning, not a warning, but just sort of heads up. We have had some discussions over the last couple of years about figuring out how to combine a position, maybe in civic center facilities with the community center, adding an additional half-time to the community center, half-time to the facilities maintenance, combine those in some way, maybe do it shift work so that they're in the evenings or, part week, part weekend, et cetera. We haven't figured out how to do that yet, but in the future, I'll remind you that we had this discussion. Because we're still, Tracy and Bill and whatnot are trying to figure that out to see whether or not we can make that work. We certainly need the help in both areas. The question is whether or not we can afford to do it. So anyway.
And I would like to add to that, Chris, thank you for bringing that up. As I mentioned, this building's getting 9 years old, pushing 10, working on 10 years old. Doesn't seem like an very old building, but as each year goes by, the level of maintenance needs go up. And so our one facilities guy is being more and more challenged every year because there's more to do. And so we're looking ahead that there's going to be a point pretty soon where he just can't keep up. And so we're trying to figure out a plan that makes sense to accomplish the needs for the facility and help out in the community center at the same time, so.
Thank you, and I know in previous budget discussions, we were just trying to increase volume here, and everyone has done a phenomenal job, and with increased volume comes additional maintenance and wear and tear, as we know, on the carpet, and in fact, in the hall, there's some molding out, and, so there's things that are gonna happen with the increased usage, and if you drive by this place on the weekend and at night, the lights are on, the parking lots are full, so it is definitely being used.
And I would like to add the trim that's missing in the hallway is because it hasn't been replaced. We moved a wall, moved a door to the west so that the Pure Court Coordinator's office is open to the public area and not behind a closed door. When we did that, the base trim needed to be extended, and the contractor's having a hard time getting the material, let alone getting it stained and put back in place. So that's what we're waiting for.
Thank you. Any other questions? No, thank you. Okay, on to citywide administration, page 120.
So with this budget, it's primarily the same, although the office materials and supplies and postage and printing are up a little bit. That's really to provide for a citizen survey if we choose to do one this next year. We did do one during 2017, so it's getting close to being time to fire that up again. So that's the increase in cost there. Then the liability insurance, we've got a preliminary word from our insurance provider that we can expect about a 7% increase. So that's really the only changes here. If there's any questions?
Questions? Okay, hearing none. So I just want to pause that at 7:25. Do we need to take a break for a few minutes, or do we want to plow through? I want to ask the group. I hear a few breaks. So
I might suggest,
or do you want to keep going? How?
Well, not necessarily keep going, but maybe we can wrap up this fund, and that's like a natural break
Okay,
point.
so do we need to do Public Works? Or just wrap up where we stopped at page 120, just for
So
clarification, sorry.
at this point, you could go ahead and make a motion on the Administrative Services Fund.
Okay.
We've completed all the sections of that fund.
And I do apologize for the boring budgets. I mean, I understand it's not exciting this year, but sometimes that's good.
Well, we are only in beginning, so we could have some excitement later, so. Mr. Burson?
I have some excitement.
Okay.
So we've talked about a 3% increase because of CPI, is that right?
Correct.
So my real question is that, you know, I understand looking at CPI, but I also think you got to look at other governments. I mean, earlier in your presentation, you talked about that you're facing not only insurance increases coming up, but also retirement increases coming up, the tune of about $250,000. And so I know the government I work in, we are offering 0.5% per year, which is the state of Oregon. So I'm curious if we've looked at other cities, because I know you're always kind of comparing us with other cities and what those yearly cost of living increases would be, or the counties, or like say other, maybe some special districts around the fire department. So I guess I'm curious about that.
Yeah, the CPIW, in fact, CPIW came in this year at 4.2, and the reason
It's
we're
going to be higher
yeah.
because the economy went up.
Right. The reason we're at 3 is because we do compare against other organizations around us, and the averages we're seeing are between 2.5 and 3.5. So that's what you're seeing sort of across the board with all of our comparators. And so for us to not fall behind our comparators, which then you have to make up at some point during a contract negotiation with unions and whatnot, we like to stay right in the middle of where our comparators are. And so 3% is roughly in the middle of that pool.
Well, not to argue this, but to be fair, you haven't negotiated with the police, so you don't know where you're going to land there.
We have a good idea of where we're going to land.
I mean, you're putting 3 in the budget, but they may want more than that. But, so those comparators that you're talking about, I mean, you have specific examples, like the city of Salem, what are they putting in for their public works director?
I guess I would also like to add that at the end of last year's budget season, we were just wrapping up the salary survey that we were doing for the non-represented employees. So we do have a process in place. I believe we're required to do it every 3, is it?
4.
Every 4 years, to go out and compare to a handful of our comparators. And then we do make adjustments, and the beginning of this fiscal year, we did come back and make an adjustment to a handful of classifications. So to answer your question, yes, we do have a process in place, and we do that every 4 years at least to compare. So the reason we're going with 3 is we're worried that in 4 years when we do it again, we don't want to have a huge major adjustment. So we are trying to compare to those comparators as we go as well. Some of them have different timings of when they announce their increases, but we do have a way of tracking that as well. So, yes.
Okay, well, like I said, I deal with a lot of governments around the state, and from local governments to, like I say, cities, counties, special districts. And it seems like to me, the message I've got back from most of those folks is there isn't a lot of increase coming to government employees. And so this 3% seems high to me when compared to other governments. Like I said, I understand the consumer price index because, like I say, the economy took off, at least
Sure.
at the beginning of the last administration. It's doing a little stalling or bumping around now.
We're
all over
also
the place.
coming off of several years of 1.5% too, where a lot of our competitors were doing a little bit more. So we have a little bit of a catch-up that we're trying to do as well.
Michelle, do you want to comment on the salary survey and maybe just highlight some cities that you look at and that we compare to that are very of similar size, population-wise, things like that. So we're not comparing us to to the city of Portland.
Right. For our represented employees, we compare to Albany, Lake Oswego, McMinnville, Oregon City, Tigard, Tualatin, West Lynn, Woodburn. Those are our comparator cities. For our unrepresented employees, we compare to those cities, and we also look at Salem and the state because we have administrative positions that are comparable, and we, on occasion, are besought with folks trying to steal those positions. So we do look at those. With respect to Ron's question, which is a valid one, Tim and Chris both are right on point with what we're doing. We do look at our UNREP comparators every year now and look at what information we have available at the time we're putting the budget together, because they do operate on different budget timelines. And sometimes they're working on their budget at the same time we are, and they don't yet have an answer for us when we ask the question. But the lowest increase that we saw was around 2%, and the highest was 4%. Actually, there's one that's 4.5%.
City of Tualatin was 4.5.
So 4.5 was the highest. And they were all in that range of those who already had the recommendation in the budget, or they were planning for it and were confidentially telling me what they anticipated they'd be proposing. So the 3% is not above the average, it's not below, it's kind of a good medium place to keep us on track right now.
Okay. Councilor Ryan?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, and I kind of ask the same question every year. I'm going to change my numbers though just a little bit out of fairness. So I showed us at approximately 110,000 this year in increases, and we're saying it's 3%. We've been at that kind of consistently for the last 2 or 3 years. That number actually isn't 110, it's 62 because of the employee that I need to minus. So to increase salaries for 62,000, where is that coming from in our budget, so I can understand? Because we do that every year, and we have no problem giving the salary increases, but we have a real tough time finding money to do things like, civic centers and libraries and TOT and things like that. So I realize TOT is a separate subject, but I'm just saying, I'm just speaking in general with increases. So would you explain to me that line item so I can
So
have a
for
reference?
each of these individual sections, we've gone and through city resolution established a criteria of how those get allocated out. So certain costs, such as the city attorney's office, is allocated to each of the different funds based off of the projects that are worked on a 3-year rolling average. So we look back, and Shannon Johnson keeps a record of what he works on. We take those numbers, break them up by fund, add them up for the 3 years and get an average, and then that's how his time gets allocated for the current year. For some of the other departments, such as HR, the council resolution authorizes us to allocate those based off of full-time equivalent employees, which would make sense for an HR department. For the finance non-departmental, we're a little bit different. We base our allocation off of the dollars spent within each of the different funds. There's different reasons for that. A lot with debt. If there's debt, there's a lot of my time involved. So that's one of the reasons why we do it that way. With IT, those based off of the council resolution are allocated. The employees are based off of full-time equivalent employees. That's how they get allocated out. Then the software hardware is allocated out based off of which department would use that software. So police, all of this police-related software, that gets allocated to them through the administrative services charge. So each of these, like I say, each of these different sections have a specific allocation method of how those costs get divvied out to the different funds.
To tag onto that, and I think getting a little bit closer to what your specific ask is, where do we find 3% each year? That comes from a number of different places. Primarily, it's the increase in property taxes that we receive based on assessed valuations going up, and the new construction that comes in. So we get new property taxes that come in each year. Also, taxes for marijuana, all of our other revenue sources. And so those come in, and we see what our revenues are increasing. The reason we choose to put that toward salaries and employees is because we're a labor-intensive business. So as an example, the police department, 90% of their cost is labor. okay? And, 92%, well, let me back that up. 87% of our general fund, or 80%, roughly 80%, 87%, it's high, is police. And 90% of their cost is labor, period. And they have training, they have, cars and other kinds of things. All of our departments are like that. We're primarily a labor force, labor-intensive business. And so if you want to invest in your business systems and keep them up to date and not turning over constantly, you invest money in keeping your systems up to date. And so therefore, we've had the policy, and the city council's had the policy to keep us in the average of what our comparators are. Okay, not high, not low, but in the average, so that we don't see turnover and start losing people to other communities or have a difficult time hiring. We have 1/3 the employees that any city close to our size has, and so we want to keep the employees that we have, train them well, and keep them here because turnover is very expensive. It costs us in money and it costs us in time. Recruitments are expensive. Getting somebody up to date to where they're productive takes a year at least. So that's why we choose to invest in our people and keep us in the average so that we don't lose people and don't have a difficult, and when we recruit people, we want to get good people. So that's.
I appreciate that. I guess for the record, I wasn't referring to like employees. This is all staff, this is all management salary increases that I'm referring to, and not including the police department at all, just what we've already discussed tonight. And that's why I was trying to think, how do we justify, and I understand your point, but I just want to make sure you knew
It's the same discussion for all positions within the city.
Sure, but I don't want anybody to think I was saying, that the city workers don't deserve an increase or something like that. I wasn't referring to labor employees, I was referring to staff management. So, thank you, I understand the answer. Thank you.
Mr. Person?
So, I don't want to prolong this, but I will say that the increase in PERS and insurance that you're anticipating coming up is also an investment in your employees.
It is.
Because that is the benefit of your employees. So, every employer is offering a salary and benefits that are out there that have to be competitive. So, my question to you folks is that this 3% hike today, when we come back next year and you have the budget where, PERS did raise up because the rates were for 2 years and now we have to pay those, and insurance could go up. Will you still be able to afford that, sustain that 3%, or because that also increases, like your PERS contributions is bringing that up. So that's just my question is, can we spend today and still afford it tomorrow?
We look at that every single year, and there are years when we choose not to try to keep up. So was it last year that we were at 1.5%, and the average was closer to 2%. And so each year we look at that and try to project out 3 to 5 years and figure out what can we afford that keeps us within the average. In some years, depending on our projections, we choose not to give the increases at the same level as our comparators around us. This year, we believe in looking out 3 to 5 years that we're able to make that investment. So,
Mr. Thompson?
On the salary survey, I think Chris told us last year that he wants to be a bargain, I think was his quote. But
every year.
How did the salary survey turn out where are we compared to our comparators?
Yeah.
I guess is a weird way
It
to
really is position by position. So I can tell you that for my position, for instance, I'm in the bottom half of my comparators, which is exactly where I like to be. Because the moment I get into the top half, people start thinking, wow, we could do better for less. So, but really, quite honestly, we try to stay within 5% above or 5% below. We don't make any changes as long as we're within that range. And this year, we had very few positions that were outside of that range, and very few were above into the plus 5%. So, but it really is position by position. So, Michelle, if you have.
Actually, I don't recall that we had any above the 5%.
Okay.
We had less than our prior salary survey, which was 4 years past. there were less positions we had to adjust, which is a good thing, because that means that even though we're not giving full increases every year, we were still staying somewhat on par, but we did have to adjust about a third of our non-represented positions, because that's where we save money as we go, because with our represented positions, we bargain what the increase is going to be for the 3 years. We can't adjust that from year to year if there's an issue with the budget. And with our unrepresented employees, we do adjust it, just as they were talking about. So right now, we're in a pretty good place with our positions because we did just complete the salary survey not too long ago. The actions we take every year impacts what position we're in when we do it again in 3 more years, because we are obligated to do it every 4 years based on our policy right now. Our represented employees get their salaries reviewed every 3 years because our contract periods are 3 years at this time.
I'm going to share Mr. Burson's point about about the roll-up costs, but at the same time, if we have half the employees of other cities our size,
yeah,
3%, a 3% increase to keep people rather than having to double the size of our workforce sounds like a bargain in the end. So
Get a lot done.
Yeah. We have great employees. We don't pay them substantially more. They wear more hats than most of the employees in many of the other cities our size, and they work hard. We don't have one of the advantages of being so leanly staffed is there's no place to hide. Everybody knows if you're not doing your job. And our folks are really very effective in what they do. So we want to keep it that way. We want to keep them on board because losing one person loses more than one FTE for us. That person leaving by retiring or taking a promotion somewhere else, it takes a lot to fill their space.
You know, and I think in a lot of ways, that's what keeps our employees so engaged. You know, they say with raises, you can give a person a raise, you know, it's a lot more money, and that motivates them for about 2 pay periods until they incorporate that big raise into their current lifestyle. You give people more responsibility or new challenges or new educational opportunities, and that keeps them motivated longer. And so with having fewer people, we require them to do more things, and they get to see more and touch more of the organization. That keeps them more engaged. You know, we're always running the risk of burning people out, but we like to push them just below that point. So,
thank you.
So.
And I would just add that we have steps within our position. So at some point, someone is going to step out at 9 or tap out 10. So, and unfortunately, those employees then would not receive a step increase. They may get a cost of living increase, but they're not going to get a step increase. And I would just, it's always interesting to me, so on page 41 of our packet is just a comparative tax rate and FTE by city, and nothing to discuss tonight, but I would just encourage everyone to make sure that you do look at that. We are on the bottom, not by choice, but we look at the bottom, I mean, we're on the bottom based on lots of numbers, but I think it just speaks highly of the staff that we have in the city, and we are lean. And so something to point out for future reference. So, any further questions, discussion? No? Okay. So at this time, I would entertain a motion to approve the Administrative Services Fund. So it's everything we've talked about tonight so far. Okay, motion from Alan.
Seconded.
Okay, discussion? All of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So at this time, it is 7:45, and so let's take 10? Okay, so we'll take 10 minutes. We'll be back here at 7:55 to resume for the last half of our agenda for tonight. Thank you. We'll go ahead and resume the Budget Committee meeting for Tuesday, May 1st. And we will continue where we left off, which is the Public Works Fund, Streets, page 123. Mr. Lawyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Really not a lot of changes in the street fund either. I would like to point out the street fund revenue comes from gas taxes that are apportioned by the state on a per capita basis to cities, counties, statewide. We see a little bit of an increase or some increase in the street fund in the current fiscal year based on more revenue on gas taxes through the state. Also increases in vehicle registration fees, those kinds of things. We'll have a much better handle over the next year or so on what we'll expect to see ongoing with that increase. But as far as impact to the fund, it's not a huge impact. The current year, I had planned to pave River Road this summer of 2018. In preparing for that, I knew that we were going, and let me stop and back up just a minute. River Road from Shamawa to the South City limits, okay, that piece of River Road, not all of River Road. I knew when we were planning to do that, we were going to have to update the handicap ramps or the ADA ramps at all the corners to meet the new ADA standards. What I didn't know in planning that is for virtually all of the signalized intersections, we have to convert those to directional ramps. Most all of them have one ramp on the corner in the middle. The new requirements say they have to be directional, so that means we have to redesign the corners, which is a lot more expensive than just replacing what's there, for one. The other thing that I learned is in addition to the ramps, we have to update all of the pedestrian crossing buttons at all the signalized intersections, because the new standards say that well, first of all, with the directional ramps, you have to have the buttons within so many feet of the ramp, and currently they're on the signal poles, so they have to be moved. They have to be a minimum of 10 feet apart because the new buttons talk and tell everybody where they're at. Shamawa, at River, eastbound, like that, such and such. And so you have to have distance between the two of them so that the visually impaired folks can discern what one they're standing at. All that being said, those costs went up significantly, and I still don't have a real solid estimate for all of that work, but I'm going to tell you it's probably in the $350,000 to $500,000 range. We're working on those designs so we can get that work done this summer and probably into the fall, because it can be done and doesn't have to be super dry weather. We'll have that all done, and then the goal is to pave River Road from Shamawa to the South City limits in the summer of 2019. So unfortunately, I'd hope to have that done this year, but it's just not going to happen. The cost of ADA compliance the cost and then the design piece that we didn't anticipate, or I didn't anticipate, it's not I didn't anticipate, slowed that project down. Included in this budget this year is the completion of the Dearborn Bridge. That construction started today. They'll work through probably near the end of October to finish the project. That project is being funded with a loan. We're actually issuing debt for that project. And then we'll spread that out over 15 years to lessen the impact of the street fund as much as possible. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Burson? So on those redesigns, those upgrades you talked about, is there any federal grants around that, since, that just seems right up the Fed's alley?
There aren't, that I have been
Nate's
found,
laughing back there. He's hiding, but he's laughing at me.
Any real grants available for, that's considered maintenance, believe it or not. Resurfacing is a maintenance treatment, and there's not a lot of grant funding for maintenance. The ramp work wouldn't need to be done if we weren't going to resurface, and so it really doesn't fall into categories for grant applications very well, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Mr. Dial.
Page 39 and page 63 talk about the Dearborn Bridge, and there's a 1.2 or a 1.8 million number on each of those pages. Which is it?
It should be 1.8 million.
Okay. All right.
And that, the project bid was 1,700,000 and change, okay? Of that, there's about $320,000 that is a storm drain realignment. That will be paid out of the stormwater fund. We'll get to that in a little bit. So the actual impact to the street fund will not be $1.8 million. It'll be about closer to 1.5. And we can make a large payment up front to reduce the debt as we go along, so.
Other questions? I have one. I did ask Bill before we started, because I know it was something when I was on the Traffic Safety Bikeways Committee, we talked about flashing lights, and we've had parent on Lock Haven into McNary, and they'd be the solar, crosswalk flashing, and we've had parents come to Traffic Bikeways Pedestrian Committee, and then part of the committee talked about maybe something potentially at Abby's Pizza. But at this point, we have nothing for any type of that crosswalk flashing in this particular budget, and I'm assuming it would be in the street fund?
Yes, it would be, and
Okay.
that is not included in this year.
Okay.
Excuse me, for McNary High School specifically, they've got some pretty significant plans for that school with the bond measure, if the bond passes. And we have met with them in a pre-application meeting, so we have some idea on what their plans are, but they didn't really show us an overall site plan for the entire property and the changes. And so before we see what they are planning to do, it doesn't really make sense to me to plan for a pedestrian crossing in a particular location, if at all, if you will, because their changes may affect that. We just don't know yet. And we should know fairly soon, and certainly much sooner if the bond is successful.
Okay,
So.
thank you.
Madam Chair?
Oh, yes.
So but on that topic, Bill, ballpark, wherever that's going to go, how much would one of those run approximately? Should we, things have to come back and, okay, hey, we're ready to go on, something like that?
Those, if they're solar powered, there's no power source, electrical provided to them. Complete, they're about $25,000 to $30,000 for the equipment, and then there's installation. It's
you have
something
to stripe the
stripe a crosswalk,
crosswalk.
which is low cost.
Yeah.
It's the equipment that's a higher cost, and that sounds like a lot of money, and it is. But within the street fund, if the school's district's project, is accelerated and moves really fast, I can probably find $25,000 or $30,000 to fund that should I need to in this next fiscal cycle.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
One other thing I forgot to mention, this is not a little unusual for the way we put budgets together, but in the street fund online, oops, I went 2 pages instead of 1. Line 69 in the capital outlay section, the unanticipated expense line item. That seems like a pretty big number, and it is a big number. I label it unanticipated expenses for a couple reasons. One, the street fund already has a contingency line item. You can't have 2 contingencies within one fund. In the capital outlay section, I labeled it as unanticipated expenses to cover contingency, which is about 10% of the capital outlay, but also included in that, we have an obligation to pay a portion of a new traffic signal at Keizer Station Boulevard and the Keizer Transit Center. It will also be an entrance into it's called Area B of Keizer Station, the site of the new theater that's coming. It's still a little unclear when that project is going to be completed. And so our agreement with the transit district is we pay half of our portion at the end of the project and then 30 days after the beginning of the next fiscal cycle. So if the project doesn't finish by the end of June of 2018, we won't have that expense. So I elected to put that in unanticipated because I just don't know for sure that it's going to happen by then. So I just want to explain that because it's a little unusual to see that big of a number in a line item labeled unanticipated expenses. So.
Any questions? Okay, moving on to street lighting districts, page 126.
I would recommend we take a motion on the street fund first.
This one we're doing one by one?
Correct. Yes, for the rest of
Thank
them for the night, we'll take each one as they come.
Thank you. Okay,
Move approval of the street fund, Madam Chair.
I'll second.
okay. Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So street lighting district, page 126, and I believe we have a corrected.
That is correct. I was hoping to make it through this without having to do a change sheet, but not so much luck tonight, I guess. So the street lighting district, each of the neighborhoods that elect to have a street lighting district, we pay the utility charges on their behalf and then turn around and assess them on their property tax statement the following year. So we're fronting the money and then they reimburse the city for the street lights in their area. With respect to this fund, we have a little over 200 street lighting districts throughout the city. For the upcoming year, we're anticipating that there might be 3 more in the works. So you're going to see a little bit of an increase in the lighting cost. In addition, the major change between this version and the previous version is in the Keizer Station Area A, we're going to be changing the light bulbs there to the LED energy efficient type of light bulbs. And that's to the tune of about $35,000 to $40,000. So this is one of those things that we've been building up money to do these kind of things. So now is the time that we're going to take advantage of that and go ahead and do that. Other than that, it really is pretty much a status quo going forward. The lighting costs typically don't vary a whole lot other than the addition of new lighting districts. So with that, if there's any questions.
Questions? And just for clarification for those watching at home, when we have an update like this, do we post it at the total end of budget or do we update this information online like tomorrow?
I'll end up updating it tomorrow.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Okay, and with that, I would entertain a motion to approve the street lighting district fund.
Madam Chair, I would make a motion to approve the street lighting district fund budget.
Second.
Okay, perfect. Discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Moving on to the transportation improvements on page 128.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Transportation Improvement Fund revenue is generated by development, paying transportation systems development fees for increased traffic loads because of the development. Really, the only change for this year is some additional revenue. The expenses identified for this year are the same as they've been for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, 7 years now. Basically, our portion of design and engineering design for the Shamawa I-5 southbound on-ramps. That's a project that we are committed to pay a portion of design for when ODOT says it's time to do it. So just waiting for ODOT to come and say it's time. We don't know if it'll happen in this fiscal cycle, but the funding is available should it happen. So
The other piece I'd like to add is when we get to the general fund, you'll see that the general fund is borrowing some money from the Transportation Improvement Fund. So you can see on line 21, oh, I have a whole bunch of line 21s. Oh, my goodness.
oh my.
On the second line 21, there's an interfund loan to the general fund. That's really to pay the construction costs for some of the infrastructure surrounding the movie theater area. So when we get to that point, we can talk about that further. So that's just one change that we have there.
Perfect. Any other questions? Oh, Mr. Thompson.
I know that we're pretty restricted on system development charges, but is there anything we could do with this fund to alleviate traffic congestion around McNary? I mean, I know it's been a hot topic in that part of the, I mean, is there anything we could do with this fund to help out with that?
Not currently. We would have to update our transportation system plan and the projects outlined in that plan to be able to make them applicable or available for these funds. So we currently no. And the fee structure would have to, at that time, would also have to be reevaluated. If you add projects, you got to reevaluate the fees to cover those costs. So for right now, no, we can't do that.
Thank you.
Additional questions?
Just
Mr.
one
Anderson?
point to make, Madam Chair. If you correct me if I'm wrong, but the level of development is really reflected on the amount of revenue that we're bringing in, is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
So just if development were a little greater, we'd be receiving more revenue, right?
Yes.
Okay.
More development, more revenue, less development, less revenue in this fund specifically, yes.
Right. Just want to point that out. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, entertain a motion on the Transportation Improvement Fund.
Madam Chair, I would move approval of the Transportation Improvement Fund budget.
I would second that.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to page 129, Off-Site Transportation Fund.
Thank you. This fund, the Offsite Transportation Improvement Fund, is specific to areas B and C of Keizer Station. There was a traffic impact analysis performed for those areas of Keizer Station that indicated there were some off-site, meaning away from the developed area property, improvements that need to be done. For instance, an additional right turn lane at 14th and Lock Haven, westbound Lock Haven, turning north onto 14th. That's the first project. We are in negotiations currently to acquire some property from the duplex on the corner there at 14th and Lock Haven. We're also going to need to acquire some property from the school district in front of Whitaker. And so once we get that closed out, which should be fairly in the next few months, then we'll finish design and work on construction probably in fiscal year 1920. And then we'll move on to the next project, which the plan says, and I'm not looking forward to this one, add another lane, left turn lane, dedicated left turn lane, Lock Haven westbound at River Road southbound. Currently, there's a dedicated left, a left through, and a right turn lane. The plan calls for 2 dedicated left turn lanes. So that means we have to add a lane there. I'm not looking forward to that project because property acquisition is going to be difficult and expensive. If you look at that intersection, you think about what's there, we're going to impact one business or another greatly. And so that's one I'm not looking forward to. So that's another example of one of the identified off-site improvements necessary for Keizer Station's area B and C. So.
Any questions? No? All right. Entertain a motion for the Off-Site Transportation Fund.
Madam Chair, I would move approval of the Offsite Transportation Improvement Fund.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to Stormwater, page 130.
Thank you. Stormwater Fund, fairly status quo. As Tim mentioned earlier, this does include a rate increase of 55% per ESU. You'll notice on line 55 a slight increase. That's because we expect an increase in our street sweeping costs. The current contract expires and we're right now just received actually some proposals for street sweeping. We'll score those and see where they land, but I expect the cost is going to go up with the new contract. Another, not change, but change from last year. This budget includes the purchase of a new F-550 service vehicle for the stormwater crew. They're currently using a 1996 flatbed F-450 vehicle that has performed well, but it's time to replace it. That's really the changes. Everything else is pretty much status quo across the board through the Stormwater Fund.
Questions? So Bill, I know there's been a lot of work on the Stormwater Committee in reference to the DEQ permit.
Yes.
Are we anticipating some additional costs? Are we kind of still waiting for some information back from DEQ?
Well, we have anticipated some of the additional requirements and incorporate that into this budget. You don't really see it. It's more of a workload issue than a direct cost issue. The actual permit issuance as of now is slated for September 2018 with an effective date of January of 19. It's still being refined. Public comments are still being evaluated and incorporated into the permit. We don't really expect a lot of changes, but this process has been going on for 7 years, and it's changed dramatically through the 7 years, both up and down, back and forth. It's to a point now where we're pretty comfortable. We know what the requirements are going to be, but we won't know for sure until we're issued the permit. So, as I said, in September, we should have the permit with being issued, and its effective date will be January of 19. And we are already working on some of the tasks that will be required in year 1 of the permit, things that we're not guaranteed but pretty much assured aren't going to change, so that we're not behind the gun when the implementation happens. So.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, entertain a motion to approve the Stormwater Fund.
Madam Chair, I would move approval of the Stormwater Fund.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Sewer, page 133.
With respect to the sewer fund, the sewer system is really managed by the city of Salem. City of Keizer's responsibility is to handle the billing component of that. The rates are actually set by the city of Salem. They're just now starting their task force, which will announce the rates that we'll have probably at the end of October. I've been chatting with the city of Salem, and they said that they've promised their city council that their rates won't go any higher than 3%. I've budgeted 4%, and that includes 3% for the rate increase I'm expecting from the city of Salem, plus an increase for new growth, additional construction in this area. It may be slightly high, but probably not too far off the mark. Other than that, really the only other piece that floats through here is a lot of the utility billing labor. That makes up a lot of the administrative service charges on line 27. So with that, if there's any questions?
Questions? Okay, seeing none. Entertain a motion to approve the sewer fund.
Madam Chair, I would move approval of the Sewer Fund.
Second?
Any discussion?
I would just like to point out that Mr. Wood almost floated a pun by us there.
I just pointed that out there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And on that note, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Somebody had to say it.
I know. Sewer Reserve Fund, page 135.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Sewer Reserve Fund is a fund that revenue comes from development as well, development that happens outside what's called the original Keizer Sewer Service District. Those boundaries were identified many, many years ago, and basically are the limits of the original portion of Keizer. I won't say the city limits, but the original developed portion of Keizer. Those funds go into the revenue goes into a fund. The city pays for trunk sewer line extensions out of that fund. Either we pay a developer to do it, or we contract the work ourselves. The latest one was in Area C of Keizer Station. We paid about, I think, $65,000 plus to reroute a sewer line into the new McLeod alignment. While it wasn't technically a trunk sewer line, it was something that was part of the sewer master plan, and so we paid for that. There's only a couple other places in Keizer left that need trunk sewer lines. One of them is Windsor Island Road, north of Lock Haven. There's no sewer line there for the better part of it. So as development occurs out there, we will assist in construction of that trunk sewer line. At that point, we will have to evaluate this fund as a whole, and at some point you will see this fund go away. Once those things are constructed, there will be no need for it anymore. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? No? Move to approve the Sewer Reserve Fund.
I'd move to make a motion to approve the Sewer Reserve Fund, Madam Chair.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to page 137, the Water Fund.
To follow up with some of our conversations from the Long Range Planning Committee meeting, we did do a water rate analysis many years ago. I think it was 2002, 2003-ish range. And it cost us roughly $43,000 at that point in time. I imagine technology increases would maybe make that cost go down, or maybe not. I'm not exactly sure at this point. I haven't gone out and explored the costing of that. Our plan is in fiscal year 2021, we'll have paid off the debt that is in the water fund. At that point, I think it would be wise for us to go out and do a new water rate analysis study. At that point, we'll have the funding without it having any impact on the rates. If we were to go out currently, assuming that we wanted to maintain the level of service that we have, maintain our capital outlay plan, we would really be talking a significantly higher rate increase to be able to cover that. And I don't think that we're really interested in doing that at this point. I did a quick calculation. One of the questions was how much is the residential multifamily subsidizing commercial? I looked at the difference, and it's about $20,000 a year. So not super big dollars, but if you're like me, every dollar counts. If we were to adjust the commercial rate and residential rate to be equal, each Keizer household would probably see a cost savings of about $1 to $1.25 per year. So to answer the question, there is some subsidy going on. Is it huge? Not necessarily, but I think that will be a political decision that we'll have to make once we do another rate analysis. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bill for the rest of the budget.
Thanks, Tim. As Tim mentioned earlier, the water fund does include a 4% rate increase. Really, other than that, the only other changes to this fund, line 58, that's pump maintenance, increased $10,000 for some regular service to our auxiliary engines and generators for our pump stations. That's something we only have to do every 4 or 5 years. Next year's time to do it. Those are pieces of equipment that don't get used a lot, very thankfully. They get exercised and tested regularly, but they're there for emergency situations, so we need to keep them operating as well as they can. The other thing I will say, you'll see on line 69 in the capital outlay section, an increase, and that's the water meters. That increase is related to our plan to replace 2 4-inch meters and 3 3-inch meters to new, more accurate meters. We discovered a number of years ago we're losing a significant amount of revenue on low flows on some of the larger meters. And the new technology, water meter technology, is such that we can pick up flows on a 3-inch meter, let's say, down to about 1.5 gallons, where the current meters, it's closer to 10 gallons before they register accurately. And so we've started a program a few years ago to replace our larger meters with these more efficient, or not more efficient, more accurate meters, and proved with the first one that we did that the payback for that meter investment on the increased revenue was about 2.5 years. So everything after that is increased revenue into the fund. So I personally wasn't convinced that we were going to see that payback, that it made sense. I was thinking it was probably going to be closer to 5 years. The first one we did was 2.5 years. And so when I saw those results, we put a program together to methodically go through the system and replace those larger meters. That's really the highlights of the water fund for next year.
Questions? Councilor Ryan?
Thank you. Are we, and this may be premature, I apologize, but are we doing any type of forecasting for the Detroit water issue and possibly providing services to Salem? I realize it's not something we can plan for at this time for the budget, but it wouldn't go into next year's budget, it would be this year's budget. So are you looking at that as a factor for the budget at all, or
I really
or
haven't.
the need assessment?
I really haven't, because that'll be on an as-needed basis. There's really not a cost to us on the front end for that. We open a valve, we sell water, they pay us for that water.
Right, I saw it
So
more as
it's-
an incoming revenue
Yeah,
as
so,
than an
so,
expense.
yeah, so I didn't project that because I don't know that it's gonna be necessary, and my understanding of the Detroit Lake project is that doesn't even happen for construction until like 21. The study period is ends, I think I read 2019, with a plan or a proposed plan in 2020 with construction to be 21, something like that.
Oh, I didn't
So
realize it
it's
was so far out.
Yeah, it's far enough down the road that it didn't need to be accounted for in this next year's budget.
I was more concerned about the affecting our residents and making sure we fulfill our need first. And
Absolutely.
so,
Our-
and that sounds like a just conversation to have down the line. I apologize. I thought it was sooner, so.
Our agreement with Salem for providing emergency water says both ways, us to Salem, Salem to us, that we will provide water if it is available. And so each respective city's needs come first. And so we won't sell water to Salem or provide water to Salem if we can't meet our own city's needs.
Sure, thank you.
Mr. Persons?
So I'm the cause of the problem on the 4% hike each year. And, you know, I'm still against that because, like I said, I think that range, and you can talk about how much it is per household, but there's a lot of households in Keizer, and we obviously are, you know, we're obviously depending on those households for the majority of this budget because there's more households than there are businesses out there. But the residents still are subsidizing businesses out there. The businesses are paying less per unit than we as residents are paying for this. And I see where it's planned for, you know, several years, and you talk about $42,000 or what it was to look at that, and it would raise it up significantly. But one of the reasons that these contingency funds stick in everything throughout this budget is for things like this. And so you have $125,000 in contingency. It seems like if we really wanted to do it, I don't want to do it in this budget, but I'm a little not, I mean, wait until 21 seems like a long time to me. And we carry contingency every year in these budgets, and I think that there ought to be some kind of commitment anyway to the residents here that we're going to at least look at this issue, and at least everybody that takes whatever unit that is of water, whatever that measured unit is, that we all start paying the same, because single-family homes pay more than multi-family units in this town also, and businesses pay the least amount for that same measure of water, the same water for everybody. And so I know my personal water bill continues to go up, and it's just my wife and I, and she's a little woman, so she doesn't use a lot of water. So I mean, I may use more, and she never washes her car. So anyway, so I think that you know that cost to look at that. You know, one of the things is I think we ought to talk about a contingency, and at least make a commitment to the residents of Keizer that, you know, because people are seeing this water bill continue to go up, and instead of just passing a budget that says several years we're going to have 4% hikes, which makes that gap go up higher because the 4% on businesses is less per unit than the 4% on residents. So, and I know I said the same thing in the long-range planning, but I think we should start making a commitment to the residents that at least we're going to look at this, and because, you know, at the end of this 4 years, like I said, you know, or no, it's not 4 years, he said several years in here. You know, there may be something else that comes up, and we're going to have raises again, because the water fund's pretty much raised about every year I've been on the budget committee. But anyway, that's what I'd.
Sure, that's a
just my
fair
2 cents,
comment.
so.
We can definitely look to incorporate the water rate survey sooner, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I'll support this budget. Like I said, I'd like to have a commitment, and not 2 years from now say, we still haven't done this, looking at this issue. So,
Sure, I think that's a great comment.
Mayor Clark?
Thank you. One of the things that we have done for our water system is the Water Master Plan, and I believe we talked at goal setting about the time frame for taking another look and update at the master plan. One of the things that I believe we've done right is make sure that our systems don't fall behind in maintenance. Other cities have found themselves with a huge bill when their systems wear out, or especially prematurely from lack of maintenance. So being on top of our system, keeping it updated, I believe is a good long-term investment, and that's part of where our rates go to, is to continue to make sure our system is current. But we did talk about a time frame for an updated master plan. With the smart meters and some other things that have come into play since we had last did our master plan, it would make sense.
Mr. Burson?
So just to be clear to everybody listening about this, I'm not against the raises of water, and I'm not against the money that's being spent on the water system. What I would like to see is that those additional costs be divvied out evenly between business and business accounts, multifamily accounts, and single-family dwellings. And so everybody is paying the same amount per unit of water. So I'm all for these things, and like I said, I think Keizer's done an excellent job of keeping us water, and I liked your meters, like you're gonna put more effective meters in some of these bigger places. So I don't want people to think I'm against the raises. I just like to see them be equitable between the different groups.
So, and I appreciate that. I think this is something that we have to continue to bring out for people to understand what the dollars are used for, and that by being proactive and looking at making use of the technologies available to us, we can deliver safe and cost-effective water to the community. I appreciate that.
And if I may, I would like to let you folks know, those of you that don't know, 2007, 2008, 2009, somewhere in that time frame during the recession years, the water fund did not have any rate increases. We elected to not raise rates, even though our water rate model indicated we should. Even after that time, we have been able to keep our rate increases below what the rate model said we should be doing, and pretty much held at a 4% rate increase, even though we didn't have a rate increase for 2 or at least 2 years, and I think it might have been 3. And I know it was 2 for sure. And that gives kudos to the city's staff, the water staff, in how effectively and efficiently they maintain the water system, because they were able to still perform their jobs and keep the water system, you know, in really, really good shape without having the revenue that the rate model said we needed to have. And so that's just a kudos to those folks, my staff, the city council for supporting that all these years as it's gone on. And I'm very proud to be able to say that even though we didn't have a rate increase when we, quote, should have, it didn't impact our ability to do what we really need to do. So.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilor Herrera?
Yeah, hey, Bill, as far as our replacement plan, what are we at on ductile iron? What percentage as far as, do we still have steel or we don't know more?
We do have some more steel, and I'll touch a little bit on the water, on the next fund we talk about. But I don't, honestly, Roland, I don't know the percentage of ductile iron against steel. It's less, we have more ductile than we used to have, I think we're
over 60 or 70%, right? Or
I would say we're probably 65% ductile or cast and 35% steel.
Better than a lot of places.
A lot better, that's right.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Entertain a motion to approve the water fund.
Madam Chair, I would move approval of the water fund.
Second. Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we're on the Water Facility Replacement Fund, page 139.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Water Facility Replacement Fund is the project fund of the water fund. Kind of hard to say that. The revenues from that are primarily come from rates. They are supplemented with SDCs for new meter connections, new service connections throughout the city. But the primary source of revenue for that fund is water rates, and you'll see that in the water fund and the transfer to this water facility fund, which is on line 81, $400,000. That goes into the facility fund to build things. This current, or this next fiscal year, let me step back just a second. For the last few years, our focus has been on mainline replacements because we had our production facilities, wells, pump stations, reservoirs, were all built, didn't need need to add anything. So we focused on water main replacement, pretty much budgeted about $400,000 a year for those. For next year, I actually reduced the water main replacement line item because we identified some other water production needs updates. One of them being to update the McNary High School or the McNary Pump Station to an automatic backup engine. There's a backup engine there now. It's powered by propane. We have a propane tank outside the building. Staff has to physically go to that pump station and activate that in a power loss. We want to convert that to an automatic system and have it powered by natural gas. More reliable, natural gas is more reliable. We don't have to worry about filling a propane tank in an emergency. Natural gas is, assuming it's running, doesn't stop. So that improvement or upgrade, we also need to replace some telemetry system components that haven't failed yet, but they're not supported either. And if they fail, our water system operation is impacted. So our plan is to get those replaced before they fail. And then the other thing we're going to need to do next year is to replace some diesel fuel tanks at 2 pump stations, Wiesner and Meadows, with 1,000-gallon tanks, so we can run those pump stations longer in an emergency if they're needed. Those are all things that are critical, primarily emergency operational things. And so instead of having a higher rate increase to fund those, the choice was to reduce the amount of main lines we replace. So that's what we're doing. And for next year, we're just planning on replacing the water line on Cummings Lane west of Shoreline. We had planned to do it this current fiscal year, but the bids came in higher than we thought, so we weren't able to do that, so we just moved it back a year. Really, the impact to that by delaying water main replacements is historically means staff fix more leaks. That doesn't mean the mains are going to break because they're steel mains. Steel mains don't typically break in half or in 2 or longitudinally along the pipeline. They'll just get a hole in them. We fix that. We've been doing that forever, and staff will continue to do that. It's not a high cost. There's not a lot of money involved in doing it. It's staff time. And so the decision is, well, we'll have to spend more staff time fixing leaks. That's okay. So that's the plan for next year.
Questions? Yes.
So I misspoke on the water system master plan update, and Bill was very polite. We did update that in 2012 as transportation system plan. I was thinking from 2007, 2008, so thank you.
It's interesting you bring that up because while it is 2012, we should be revisiting that every 10 years. It's only a couple years away.
Time flies when you're having a good time.
It really does fly. So I didn't mention anything because it's really not that far out to at least take a look. Wouldn't be necessarily a comprehensive update of the water master plan, but it should be revisited about every 10 years and make sure it's still current. So.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? No. Okay. Entertain a motion to approve the water facility replacement fund.
Madam Chair, I would move approval of the Water Facility Replacement Fund.
Second.
Okay. Further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Park Improvements Fund, page 140.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Park Improvement Fund revenue is generated by systems development fees on residential development, both single-family and multifamily. Commercial properties do not pay parks SDCs. This is somewhat of a status quo budget. Primarily includes expenses associated with the construction of the bathrooms at Keizer Rapids Park that had originally been planned to be basically under construction and nearly done by now. But the bids came in quite a bit higher than we thought. And so we stepped back, reevaluated it, and it just went back out for bid to be constructed in the fall, winter, spring months. The original plan was to build it in the spring, summer months. Our hope is that by having construction in the fall, winter, spring months, we'll catch contractors when they're less busy, which means lower prices. We hope. We'll find out May 22nd.
Questions? Mr. Brisson.
So in line 14, Bill, looks like $100,000 is coming into this fund from the general fund. Why is that?
Correct. During this fiscal year, the police department purchased a bunch of radios, about $300,000 worth of radios. The general fund wasn't able to afford that, so it took a loan from the Park Improvement Fund. And this is the first year that we'll end up paying part of that loan back. So that's the $100,000.
And that loan amount, 215,700, shows up on line 24.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Counselor Anderson, sorry. He's just over here thinking I just don't want to cut him off, so. Counselor Anderson.
Be safe than sorry. Sorry, I may have missed this, Bill or Tim. Perhaps you could just talk about this, but going back to the beginning balance, there's a significant drop from the projected from 17-18 to the proposed 18-19, and can you just explain that a little bit, please?
Yeah, about half of that, $456,000, is grant funding that we didn't receive. Okay? We did not receive because we didn't build the bathrooms.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, okay.
Bathrooms, that is a grant, it's a reimbursement grant, so we have to build the bathrooms. Well, it's more than just the bathrooms, let me back up. That grant fund was for the surfacing at the Big Toy, the port in place, rubberized surfacing, the new pathways at Keizer Rapids Park, and the bathrooms. We've completed the surfacing and the pathways, but not the bathrooms, and I elected to not ask State Parks for any funding until we're done.
Okay.
So that's why.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yeah.
Additional questions? No? Okay. Entertain a motion to approve the Park Improvement Fund.
Madam Chair, I would move approval of the Park Improvement Fund.
Second. Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. This completes our agenda for tonight. Before we adjourn, anything we need to be aware of for Thursday when we resume Thursday, May 3rd at 6 p.m.? City Manager?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
I will not be here
Mr. Burson will not be here.
No,
Not for dinner, right.
Yeah, you don't have to give me dinner.
Okay. Any other comments before we adjourn? Tracy, do you need anything for Thursday?
There will be dinner.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Counselor Anderson.
Madam Chair, I just have noted previously I will not be able to be here for that meeting, for dinner or for the meeting. Thank you.
So with that, we will adjourn at 8:45, and again, we will resume on Thursday, May 3rd, right back here, and council chambers at 6 p.m. Thank you.